Wonderful. Just a little bit of patience goes a long way. Okay, so just to repeat myself, my name is Hadiza Saadu. I'm the Small Business and Nonprofit Specialist at the Kansas City Public Library. So I work with people, in addition to putting on programs like this, I work with people one-on-one who are either at the ideation phase or are managing a small business or represent a nonprofit organization. So I meet with people one-on-one and help them with virtually anything you can think of. In addition to that, I am also a musician myself. I've been pretty active in Kansas City. I'm not originally from here, but I bring that up not to toot my own horn, but because it is actually relevant to the content today. I am also a recipient of the 2019-2020 Inspiration Grant from Arts KC, which allowed me to press vinyl for my first album. And so from that experience, I have some key takeaways to share that I will be sprinkling in here and there as far as examples go as we go through this presentation. So we are talking about searching for grants if you're an artist, musician, or performer. If I could just get to the next page. Oh, somebody is chatting. That's so flattering, Chris. That's amazing to hear. I need to rein that in right now because we are in library mode, but that's awesome. Thank you for letting me know that. That's cool. My computer screen is frozen, and so I am not able to get to the next slide right now. So please bear with me as my computer screen unfreezes. Okay. We're gonna stop the share for a second. Figure out what's going on here. Now we're gonna get back into it. Hopefully this works. All right, okay. So today's agenda, just to give you kind of a layout of where we're going with our time, we're gonna start off with an introduction, and I'll tell you it's not brief because I wanted to give an illustration of kind of like the before pandemic and the after, even though we're not in the aftermath of the pandemic. We are very much in the thick of the pandemic. So I wanted to paint that picture to get started. And then we're gonna jump into steps that you should take to get ready before you even start searching for grants. And we're gonna be talking a lot about budget with that, because that is the thing that took the most time for me when I applied for the Arts KC grant. And then we are gonna cover a few local and national based emergency and project and work-based grants. So we're gonna go a little bit into each of the opportunities that I've highlighted. And from there, I'm gonna show you guys a few sources that you can take advantage of to find available grants outside of the opportunities that I will be showing you guys. And then to wrap it up, I'll cover a few additional resources that you can use to leverage in a grant application as you do your research and to build relationships with key people in different funding organizations. And so if you guys have any questions, please feel free to throw those in the chat. Or you can raise your hand. I do just want to remind you I am one person, so I don't have a person that is manning the chat. So I may not see it immediately, but I will definitely get to it. And then just some housekeeping. As a follow-up, you will be getting a copy of this presentation. And I find that important because there's links for each of the opportunities listed, as well as different resources that you can use. There are links in there that you can directly go to, so you don't have to find them. I will also be sending out a survey, so please let us know your feedback. Okay. So it looks like I have to do this where I have to stop sharing to be able to go to the next slide, which is very tedious. So I'm sorry about that. We are dealing with technology. Okay. Yeah, this is definitely going to be annoying, but okay. Fact or fiction? Grants are only given to organizations. So obviously this is a rhetorical question. You guys might be able to guess the answer given what this presentation and session is about. That's fiction, obviously. So to give you a few facts and figures to that, the Americans for the Arts did a study in 2015, and they found that 35% of local arts agencies, so think of that as like your Arts KCs or your Charlotte Street Foundations here in Kansas City, they provided financial support only to individual artists. So that's 35% of local arts agencies are giving grants only to individual artists. And then 30% are giving to both organizations and individual artists. So when we talk about funding and support for artists, we are focusing the content today on grants, but we're also, in the world of this, we're also talking about fellowships. They could be fiscal sponsorship as well, residencies, and free and discounted services. So the name of the game here in the art world is, by and large, artists are not looking for financing, not looking for capital that requires repayment. So stark difference from the small business world at large. Okay, I have to stop this again. Oh, yes. This is already being recorded, so you'll be able to see it. And I will also be sending you the presentation itself. Okay, so let me get this back up. Okay, so before the pandemic, I was able to find a few facts and figures that I found very interesting that I felt kind of painted where we were. In 2019, there were about 2.5 million artists that were participating in the labor force. So they were participating either by being self-employed or they were wage or salary workers. This next statistic, I think, is really, really interesting. And I personally find interesting because it applies to some, I feel as an artist, as a musician, we don't talk about that much when we're talking about the condition of artists as far as being able to take advantage of opportunities and who is considered full-time versus professional versus real, you know, those types of labels. So I'll just read it out loud. Also in 2019, about 330,000 self-employed or wage and salary workers held second jobs as artists. So read that again. What this is saying is there were 330,000 people who were either self-employed or working for a salary or wage in another field who had a second job as an artist, which tells you a lot. It means that's part of their life, that's part of their identity. And they're going to find a way to earn income from that in addition to their primary income. Another thing I found interesting was that from the four-year period of 2012 to 2016, there were about 34% of artists who were self-employed. And so when you compare this to the workforce at large, what you can say is 9% of workers at large were self-employed, which is very interesting and speaks to the industry. It's a creative industry. It lends itself to self-employment. Another thing that was really, really interesting is that the proportion of workers in the US who are artists actually grew over 6% from 2006 to 2017. But what we also see is that in 2012, the median income for artists was about $30,000 if you had a high school degree, and $5,000 more if you had a bachelor's degree. So even though the artist proportion of the US labor force was growing and overrepresented in its growth compared to other industries, especially when we're considering the recession, we see that the median income is pretty low. So pre-pandemic, if you're an artist, if you're a working artist, you're probably very familiar with the, I guess the old age, the starving artist, that idea. Really what I'm trying to illustrate here is that before the pandemic, the economic conditions of artists were, you could say, precarious. They weren't necessarily the most stable or the most financially lucrative. And so that's why organizations that provide grant funds have identified artists as a specific group of individuals that they want to dedicate support to. So even though organizations by and large are focusing their efforts on other organizations, when it comes to individuals, they're prioritizing artists. So here we go again. Okay, so now we are in the pandemic. We're almost a year in. So I've got a few figures that capture what life was like for artists at the onset of COVID-19. So as of April 2020, and so this is actually from a survey conducted by the Americans for the Arts, and they're actually still collecting this data. But as of April 2020, they had 10,000 respondents to their survey. And out of those responses, 62% of artists and creative workers said that they were fully unemployed due to COVID-19. 95% of those 10,000 people who responded said that they had experienced income loss. They also estimated that the average decline in annual income per creative worker in 2020 was $27,000 and $103, which is quite hefty per person. Additionally, prior to COVID-19, 28% of respondents said that they had no savings. That number increased to 53% because directly related to the pandemic. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of artists who also work non-creative jobs. Oftentimes, creatives, artists, cultural workers are also working in retail or the restaurant industry. So 31% who said that they also work in non-creative jobs were also ended up being furloughed or laid off, 49% who said that they work non-creative jobs as well. And then kind of more towards the realm of creation, the process, 80% said that they saw a decline in revenue generating creative productivity. So that's new works, collaborations, things like that. Either the process itself couldn't happen or the revenue generation potential diminished due to the pandemic. And then last but not least, 60% reported not being able to access resources and people necessary for that creative work. So that kind of goes back to that stat that I listed right above. So there's so many nuances to this. So if you're a musician, this 60% figure, I can speak to it. One of them, when you think about going into the studio, if you had a plan to work on an album, it's not exactly safe to be singing in a studio and expelling droplets at a higher velocity than if you're just talking. So there's so many different ways that COVID-19 has impacted arts and cultural workers and the industry at large that unless you're in it, it's kind of hard to see the different connections and the different nuances with that. So now I'm going to get to our next slide by stopping the share. Okay, so now we're finally going to get into what you guys came here for. So there's a few things to think about before you begin your search, before you begin an application to an available grant. You want to take time to ask yourself a few questions related to your income. So I'm framing this from the perspective of non-emergency funding. So if you have a project that you're looking to fund, you want to really hone in on what your income goals are for the project. Like what kind of revenue are you trying to get from the project? Which can be scary to some artists who don't necessarily frame their work in that way. But the way that I view it is your art is kind of an engine and you are investing time, you're investing skill, and you're investing resources into your work. So as you do that, you want to continue doing that work. And to do that work, you need resources, you need revenue. And so each project can be an engine to fuel future projects. So that's kind of what I mean as far as like sitting down and framing things from an income goal. So in this context, you also want to think about what projects were you working on that have been impacted by COVID-19? What is their status? Obviously, as an artist, you know that innately, but it helps a lot to have that written down and to explain the what, where, and the why, and the how. From there, you also want to talk about any pivots that you have made as an artist with your work as a result of COVID-19. Oh, and I apologize, there is a typo there, that how should not be there, so apologies for that. So if you're a musician, you've probably invested in infrastructure for live streaming. If you are a visual artist, you have probably tried to look at ways to do virtual exhibitions. If you're a performer, if you're a dancer, you, like a musician, you have also probably looked into ways to put on high quality productions. So especially in the creative industries, pivots are always happening. So COVID-19 is no exception. Document those. Now, last but not least, what new projects are you pursuing? And what I've been seeing a lot is there's a lot of new projects that are occurring that probably would not have occurred if COVID-19 had not happened. So that's an exciting opportunity to just kind of think about where you were and where you are now and how your income goals, even if they weren't necessarily refined beforehand, how they can become more refined as we move forward into this brave new world. Okay, so now we're gonna get a little bit into budget and narrative. So things that you need to prepare. Basically, it boils down to three things that you wanna have ready before you even get into any grant application. Because if you have these things ready, it takes out a lot of the time that you're gonna spend if you hadn't taken the time beforehand. That makes sense. So first thing to prepare is a budget estimate, and that is gonna take the most time. I don't know if this is a rule or a generalization, but artists, musicians, creative cultural workers, in my experience, are not the most keen on working with finances. But what I can tell you is that there's a lot of resources out there that make it a lot easier for you. And if you look at it from the lens of this is part of the creative process, it can get a little bit more fun. So then to that, you also want to have, if we're talking about project-based grant, you want to know what is it about your work that will resonate with the wider community, and how will that in turn impact the wider community. That's a really important thing, because if you haven't thought about it to the point of getting ready to actually apply, you really do want to think about it, because even if a grant is not necessarily asking per se, what is the community impact of this project, being able to articulate that is really powerful, particularly when we're talking about locally based grants. Now, if you're looking for emergency funding or funding that is kind of related to COVID-19 and not necessarily like an emergency, I hate having to qualify things, but you do want to have an impact narrative or statement ready, just to basically illustrate how has COVID-19 impacted my work and how will I use the funds, basically. All right, now we're going to do this thing again where we stop the share. Can you guys tell that I really like doing that? Okay. Okay. So diving a little bit deeper into the budget. So I'll give you a little bit of perspective here. So when I applied for the Arts KC Inspiration Grant, first of all, I did things that you shouldn't do. I actually found out about it on the day of the deadline. I found out about it in the morning, and I had been like really wanting to like figure out how to do vinyl for the longest time, and I saw it and it was the most perfect opportunity. And so I was like, oh, I need to get this done. So the things that I think were really strong about my application were the work itself, the description of my projects, and the articulation of basically how this work fits within the community and how it will work to foster community. What was not a strong point was my budget, because it didn't add up. And it didn't add up because I was rushing. As you can probably guess, if I'm filling out a really long grant application on the day of the deadline, I'm probably going to be making some mistakes. So off the bat, I wasn't really going about this the right way. I kind of just like found out about it and then took advantage. Don't be in that position, because if you're in that position, you're going to make mistakes, and you can't rely on luck. I don't want people to rely on luck like I did. So there's a few things that I think that folks can do to take more control of that process, so that if you're in a situation where you do find the perfect grant opportunity and the deadline is 12 hours later, you're already ready to go. So the first thing you want to do is survey your needs. So for a project, you're going to want to identify and list all of the resources that you're going to use to complete the project. So the first list that you make, it should be completely exhaustive, and it should also include resources that you can get at no cost. And make sure as you're getting pricing that you're keeping track of where the quotes came from. That way, when it comes time to actually execute the project, if you do get the grant, or if you find other funding, when it does come time to execute, you know exactly where to go and you're not wasting time. From there, you want to take the time to research, compare, and contrast. So for each aspect of the project that you're working on, for the resources that you identify, you want to find multiple resources. So you want to assess what are the resources that make sense for my project. So if it's a film project, you're going to want to be looking at different, I guess, tiers in your industry for price references. So there's Blockbuster, there's indie, There's, yeah, you know, blockbuster to indie. So we're talking about very high production value to lower budget, but potentially higher room for creativity and experimentation. So you're gonna want, again, that's where you are assessing your needs. You already know what the project is intended to be. And so depending on what your needs are, you're gonna establish that price range. So maybe based off of what your project is, it doesn't even make sense to look at the blockbuster range, but maybe it makes sense to look at an example of like a higher budget indie film. So what you're doing is basically from the needs that you have identified for your projects and for what your goals are for your project, you are establishing a price range for each of the different resources based off of the different prices that you can find. And so then within that price range, you want to determine a price point that makes sense for you. And typically the mid to high range will do you the most justice. Because remember, you're applying for a grant. That's the end goal here. You're applying for a grant. It's not just an internal budget to understand how much everything is going to cost, but you're also going to be asking for money. So make sure you're giving yourself padding room. Don't lowball yourself, basically. So you want to also create multiple budgets. That's if you're really, really going after it. If you really, really, really want to stay competitive in grant cycles, you want to create 3 different budgets at least. A full budget, an austerity budget, and an actual budget. So a full budget sounds like what it sounds like. So this is if you were to go with the highest price for everything that you have listed as far as your resources go. So that would be if you were not able to get any discounts for anything. The austerity budget is if you know that you're going to be strapped for cash and you need to go low. So you're going to be going on the lower points. And then the actual budget is going to be somewhere in between. And that's pretty much goes with what it looks like. So it's basically following that mid to high range that you establish with the price points and finding that particular point for each of the different resources in your budget. So you're going to start with a working draft that will basically be used as a living document for internal use that's going to help drive your project. And then you're going to take that internal budget and you're going to adapt it for each of the different grants that you apply for, depending on what they ask for within the budget. Okay. All right. Now we're going to go through, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to click on this. Hopefully I can. If you are familiar with Kansas City's arts organizations, some of these organizations are going to be familiar to you. This is an overview of different emergency grants that I found that I feel like are relevant to the interests of people in Kansas City who work in the arts, just based off of people that I know. And so, as I said before, I'm going to send this as a PDF, so you'll be able to click on each of the links. I tried to make sure to include any upcoming deadlines for those grants that have a deadline. So I'll cover these briefly. The Rocket Relief Fund, put on by the Charlotte Street Foundation and Arts KC, that's technically a rolling application. They don't announce the winners, but it's open to artists of all disciplines, and it's an emergency fund for artists, basically. So that's rolling until April 18th. Abby's Fund, that is a fund by the Midwest Music Foundation, who do great work in health advocacy for musicians specifically. So this is focused on musicians. This is emergency healthcare funding. And so this is a fund that existed pre-COVID. It is not directly COVID related, but healthcare is an extremely pressing and important issue for musicians in particular. So they identified that need and decided to create a fund for that. And then last but not least, local to Kansas City, this wonderful organization called the Untaught Collective. They are a queer and trans electronic music collective. They have just announced a mutual aid fund application. So this is not focused on artists per se, but this is an application that is only open to trans women, where they're prioritizing Black trans women and trans women of color. And so that first deadline will be March 1st. If you are looking to support them so that they can sustain this effort, they're also taking donations. So that's something, if that's something you want to connect on offline, I'm more than happy to send you that information. So on the national scale, this is by no means an exhaustive list. This is a list of grants that I felt were high quality. They don't have a cost for entry, because a lot that I found have like a $15 or $20 fee, and I don't want to promote any of those. You can find those on your own for sure if that makes sense for you, but don't feel like the library should be presenting potential grants that you have to pay for. So I'm going to cover each of these very briefly. This SURF Plus Craft Emergency Assistance. This is specific to medical expenses due to COVID-19. I'll just click on that. Okay, that's going to take forever to load. I should not have done that. All right. Like I said, you'll be able to click on these once I send this via email when we wrap this up. Below that, we've got an organization called GLAD Day. They have an emergency survival fund for LGBTQ and Two-Spirit artists, performers, and tip-based workers. So this is focused on living expenses for folks in this demographic who make their living performing or from tips. Okay, so that link is starting to open. So my computer is frozen and I can't even read my screen. Okay, here we go, we're back. Sorry about that. Below that, we've got the Artist Fellowship Financial Aid Fund. And this is emergency aid that is given to professional visual artists and their families during periods of sickness and bereavement. So this one is also not COVID-19 related, and they do specify professional. They have specific, they have a specific definition of professional. So definitely look through the eligibility requirements. I believe what they said, it was working full-time for 5 years, something like that. So I do want to back up and say, when you are looking at different opportunities, sometimes they are going to stipulate professional or full-time. And if that's the case, make sure you're reading the fine print, because if you don't qualify for that, then all of that great work that you're putting into applying for that grant is going to go to waste. Okay, below that, we've got the Musicians Foundation. This is a national organization. They've created a fund specific to COVID-19 emergency relief for musicians. Below that, you might have also heard of Equal Sound. This one is actually not open anymore, but I wanted to put that there because you can absolutely sign up to be on their email list for any updates. And they are very communicative. So they do want to open it back up, but there's been such high demand that the funds were completely exhausted. But it's a good one to at least know about in case things change. And that's specific for musicians. Then we've got Actors Fund, again, another national organization. They've got a fund for emergency financial assistance, and this is for theater workers specifically. And then we've got an Artists and Cultural Leaders of Color Emergency Fund. These are one-time micro grants for $200 to any US-based Black, Indigenous person of color who's an artist or cultural worker. And so that is a Google Doc that you can fill out. Or if you know somebody that would be beneficial for. Here we go again. I'm gonna stop the share. Okay, so this is just an overview of work and project-based grants. So grants that are intended to support a specific project of an artist or to sustain the work of an artist. So the Charlotte Street Foundation has several different calls to artists that are currently active. And these are open to performers, musicians, visual artists. Definitely take a look at that because the deadlines are all different. It's all on one page, so the link to that is right there. Arts KC, who I've mentioned, and who does amazing work in town in addition to Charlotte Street. They've got the Inspiration Grant that they have that will, I believe, it will be open at the end of the month. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I wish I could click on this and show you directly, but that should be open sometime soon if it's not already open. I might be speaking incorrectly there, but the information is on the website and the link is right there. And then the Mid-America Arts Alliance, which comprises of, and I'm sure I'm going to be missing a couple states here, but they represent Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri, in addition to other states. They've got an Artistic Innovations Grant, which is, I would say is very similar to the Arts KC Inspiration Grant, but it's more regional than local. And then an organization called Creative Capital. Basically, they have $50,000 available in project funding and career development, as well as counsel services for professional artists. Again, they have a definition of professional artists that they stipulate, so make sure to check that out if that's something that you're interested in and make sure that it applies to you. If you are a painter over the age of 45, the Lillian Orlowski and William Freed grant is available if you have demonstrated financial need. And the whole point of this grant is to boost the exposure of painters who really haven't had their shine yet, who are over the age of 45. And then last but not least, we've got the Sustainable Arts Foundation. This deadline is next week, next Friday, February 26th. If you're an artist or a writer with at least one child who's under the age of 18 with a strong portfolio, they said specifically a strong portfolio with polished work. And so that's kind of their definition of professional. Their whole intent here is to support artists who are also parents financially. And so if that's you or someone you know, definitely apply to that because that's one that's that I think is open every year. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to cover a few tips and tricks as far as the application, your searching, and your sourcing goes. First thing, if you come across a grant opportunity, and I've said this a couple of times up to this point, read the fine print, specifically as it regards eligibility. Make sure you're eligible for the opportunity before you apply. Time is of the essence. If you spend so much time on an application that you later on realize you weren't eligible for, that's time you could have spent either developing a relationship with a better match or applying for grants that actually make sense for you. I think this part, the second point, is one that it might take a little work if you're not already inclined to do this. But if you know that you want to do a project and it's something that's a passion for you and you really, really want it to happen, then, and that grants are available, then the search should be part of the creative process. So what I mean to say by that is give yourself time. Give yourself time. You don't need to rush if this is a project-based thing. Obviously, if it's an emergency, that's a different story. But the more that you can kind of integrate the search into the creative process, the more prepared you are, basically. The more prepared you are to take advantage of opportunities that just show up at your doorstep that you didn't know about the day before. I think it makes sense as you do your search to start local and then expand. As far as where to look, I know somebody's probably going to ask this question. And if you are familiar with a database called Foundation Directory Online, you're probably wondering why I have not brought that up yet. The reason why is because the version for organizations, that's the one that's available to people from home right now. So the one that's for individuals specifically is not. And I don't want to share that with you guys for you to be disappointed. So what I found is that Google has been yielding very good results depending on how you do your search. And so I'm more than happy to sit down with any one of you to talk about the search process itself if you're using a search engine like Google, or if you do want to use Foundation Directory Online just to find potential organizations to reach out to. So what I mean by this when I'm saying start local and then expand, I've given you an overview of local grant opportunities. If you're not already familiar with them and they speak to you, they seem like organizations that make sense for your work, then now's the time to really understand what they do, understand the work that they've done in the past, who they are supporting now, the initiatives that they are putting forth now, and really see how your project aligns with their mission. And so from that, then you can take advantage of relationships and networking. Because if you're local, it's a lot easier to connect with someone on that level than if you're not. So that's why I say start local, because you never know what networking can lead to beyond local. You never know who somebody knows. So maybe a grant opportunity is not open today, but somebody knows somebody in another organization that is not based in Missouri, but is open to supporting artists in Missouri. You never know. You just literally never know. Apply early and apply often. A lot of these applications are rolling. So you may not hear from them the first time. That doesn't mean that you have been rejected. It means that you should apply again and refine your case. So the apply early, that applies to any grant opportunity. Ideally, you want to know about a grant as soon as it's announced, or in the most ideal scenario, you know about a grant before it's even announced because you have a relationship built with the organization. In those cases, as soon as you know about the grant, start the process. In my case, I knew about the grant the day it was due. So it was I still had made a mistake. So I could say, oh, well, I didn't know about it, but I knew I wanted to press vinyl. My thing was that I guess I just didn't think it was like a realistic enough goal to really like look at and really like look through. But when I found out about the Arts KC grant, then it became a reality. So that's also going back to the point of make the grant search part of the creative process. Because if I had done that, then I would have already looked at different price ranges for manufacturing plants. I would have already spent time really understanding the process because it's a lot of different steps. And I would have been a lot more prepared with my budget. So it just goes back to say, like, even though it might seem like a daunting thing, or, oh, I'm an artist, I don't need to worry about like the business part of it. You do though, you do. If you want to keep at your practice and you want to continue, if you want to continue to develop as an artist, you need resources. And so you need to take advantage of the space that we're in, which is the fact that organizations want to support individual artists. You just have to present your best foot and your best face. So from there, before I miss the rest of this, this is a trick that I think we don't talk about a lot. But when you find an opportunity that's closed, that's the opportunity for you to join an email list. And that's a passive way to get information about that organization and know what they're about, what they're doing in this present moment. And then that's also a way for you to know about any updates without having to go and find it or potentially forget about looking. And then last but not least, I'm kind of a data person. And I won't say that as far as like the strength of your application goes, I'm not gonna just point blank say like having data and figures bolsters your application, but it might. And it might, you never know, it actually might spark something because you might find a stat that speaks to your situation as an artist. So I have a couple of resources here related to data and databases. And this should have included Foundation Directory Online, so I apologize there. But the Americans for the Arts, that survey that I was mentioning, they've got a dashboard showing the results in real time of COVID-19, COVID-19's impact on artists and creative workers. And it's very, very thorough. So if that's something you're interested in looking at, whether it's maybe even from a policy standpoint, definitely take a look at that. This other link here, this is actually a link to a Google Sheet that this is an open sourced project where basically artists responded and basically were asked to add up the amount of money they lost due to gig cancellations. So this is also a really interesting document to look at if that's something that you want to explore further. Okay. Let's get to the last slide here, if it will allow me to. Okay. All right, lastly, we've got additional sources and resources. So sources where you can basically find lists of grants that have been curated by other organizations, resources to kind of help you as far as training goes, and then databases. So this link here is another Google Doc. And the way this list is, I really like it because again, it's also open sourced and it's got a wide variety of different artist emergency funds across the United States. And they've ranked them by difficulty, and they've also categorized them by the discipline. And even within disciplines, they've even gone so far as to like identify genre in the case of like blues artists or blues musicians. Candid is an organization that focuses on providing nonprofit resources. And so they've got educational resources specific for individuals who are looking for grants in the arts. So definitely look at that. I would say even start there if you feel like you're kind of lost with it, if this is completely new to you. So like I said before, Foundation Directory Online is only available so Foundation Directory Online Essential is available to you from anywhere. It used to be the case that Foundation Directory Online was only accessible at the Central Library by appointment, but once COVID-19 hit, they made it a limited version available to everybody from home. So they have that available, but they also have a version for individuals that is not available from home. And I've been talking with them, and unfortunately that is not in the plans for them to make that available. However, Foundation Directory Online can be useful if you're just trying to identify potential organizations to do further research on outside of the database. So you can conduct a keyword search where the subject is arts and culture in Kansas City. And then what you'll find is a list of funders. You'll be able to see the tax documents of the grantees that received funds from them in the past. And then you can also, what's probably the most beneficial out of this is they have funder profiles where you get to see the breakdown as far as the types of projects that they fund, the amount that they give in grants, and the places that they fund projects. Beyond that, you see key executives. So there's a who's who section that gives you names, which you can then go and cross-reference either in LinkedIn or in another database called A to Z, which you can create mailing lists from and also find contact information for key executives. So basically what I'm saying here is you can use Foundation Directory Online if you're trying to find as many different grants as possible and take advantage of as many different resources. Foundation Directory Online can be a database that you use to create a list of funders that meet your criteria, and then use that list where you've identified the key people, the who's who, and cross-reference that in other places like LinkedIn or A to Z databases. And that is something I would love to help anybody with. So feel free to schedule a meeting with me. I've got the link listed right here. And again, I know that I've said this so many times, I will be sending this presentation by email to everybody that has registered. Of course, everybody that's on today. And then in addition to that email, there will be a project outcome survey where you can give us some feedback. We love the feedback because it's kind of a new thing. This is a presentation created completely from scratch. So I definitely want to know what we can do to improve. And I will also include a link to a LibGuide, which just has a listing of general business resources in case any of those resources apply to you. So with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I'm going to go ahead and open, Oh, wonderful. Let me go ahead and share this. I'm going to share this right now. I missed this because I was only on Abby's fund. I'm going to share my screen really fast. Yeah, I don't know if you guys all saw that, but Amber Hewlett shared that Midwest Music Foundation has an emergency $250 micro grant for COVID-19 relief, which I failed to share in the presentation. So I'll actually go ahead and include that in the PowerPoint. That way you guys all have that. You don't have to save this link here, but I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Amber. Does anybody have any questions related to anything that was covered in the presentation? Okay. If I'm going to take that as a no, there will be a recording of this shared. I think it will be shared to YouTube. So you'll get this as well. So if that's it, I want to go ahead and thank you again, everybody, for your time, for joining me today, and for your attention. I definitely looking forward to warmer weather. So everybody, please stay warm. And you will have my contact information if you want to follow up. Oh, I have one more. Thank you, Camille. Thank you, Chris. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting.